This was a video that I was planning on making much later on during the lifetime of the channel, but just recently I tore a muscle in my back, so since I'm now having to follow this advice, it seemed like a good time to give you my tips on how to stay sane as a martial artist when you are coping with an injury. One of the unfortunate realities of being a martial artist is that at some point, no matter how safe you are going to get injured. Maybe somebody went too hard in sparring, or maybe you messed up a technique, or maybe it's just a freak accident. But this is an inherently dangerous hobby. We are learning how to hurt people, which means sometimes people are going to get hurt. Or maybe your injury had nothing to do with martial arts, life happens. But you're still going to have to learn how to deal with how it impacts what you're passionate about. So let's start with tip number 1. Make peace with it. Maybe you've heard of the Kubler-Ross model or the 5 stages of grief before. Those are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. This model was initially developed to explain the grieving process of someone who has learned they have a terminal illness, but is now recognized to be applicable to many types of loss, such as the death of a loved one, a divorce, a close friend moving away, or even losing the ability to do something you are passionate about. For a lot of us, being a martial artist is a part of our identity, and losing that ability has a very real psychological hurt. You are very likely going to go through these 5 stages if your injury is going to have a lengthy recovery. You may tell yourself you can work through it with some ibuprofen and tape. You may get mad at your training partner who hurt you accidentally. Some days you're just going to want to sit on the couch and cry. These are all normal feelings, and it's important to recognize that you may go through all or only some of them, and not necessarily in order. It's also important to recognize that acceptance is a stage, not an end goal. Just because you have a bad day does not mean you've backslid. But acceptance is a stage that we want to work for and want to try to stay in. Just know that wherever you're at, it's normal and it's okay. Now with these tips, I want to make it very clear that I am not a doctor or a psychologist, and I'm not giving any sort of medical advice. It's a very dumb idea to get your advice from some idiot on YouTube. Which brings me to tip number 2. Follow the doctor's orders. Now, if what you suffered was a major injury, I certainly hope that you went to the doctor and got it checked out. If you did, pay careful attention to your doctor's instructions and follow them as closely as possible. You are going to be strongly tempted to get back to training as soon as possible, but if you get back out there too early, you run a very strong risk of getting re-injured and setting your training back even further. That said, I do encourage you to advocate for yourself. Make sure the doctor understands your priority is to get back on the mats as soon as safely possible, and ask for them to help you come up with a plan to accomplish that. But if you don't like their answer, that's just too damn bad. Recognize that you are biased by your desire to train again, and that their answer is going to be objectively the best one for you and your recovery, no matter how much it hurts to hear. Tip number 3, learn from it. A lot of the time our injuries come from freak accidents, and there's not much you could have done to prevent it or done differently in hindsight. But sometimes there's a lesson to be learned. Were you sparring too hard and should have gone more easy? Or maybe your partner who went too hard, but you didn't speak up and ask them to cool it. Maybe you tried some crazy technique you weren't ready for, or maybe you did everything perfectly except one little detail. Now's the time to reflect. Don't obsess over it, because that's not going to be good for your mental health. But remember what happened, what you could do differently, and make it an active goal when you do finally return to training. All right, and now for tip number 4, probably my favorite tip: find alternative means to grow. Unless you suffered some kind of horrible head injury, it is likely that for the time being you are only incapable of engaging in martial arts physically. Luckily, martial arts are just as much mental as they are physical. This would be a great time to get caught up on your ever-growing backlog of instructional videos, or to do a film study on your favorite fighter to see if there's any new tricks or nuances you can learn. Maybe you could head down to your local library and pick up a book on the history of your martial art, or maybe even make a video about your injury to try to finally get your fledgling YouTube channel off the ground. Yeah. The point is, there's a lot more to martial arts than punching, kicking, and hitting things. Those are what we can focus on during the times where we are physically able, but now is where we can grow in other areas that we may have been neglecting. Tip number 5, engage in other hobbies. For some of you, martial arts might be the only hobby you have in your life, and hey, no judgment here. Martial arts take up a lot of time and effort, and it can be hard to fit other things in. But times like these are exactly why you need to have more than one passion you can pursue. Do you have a backlog of video games you can finally dive into? Or a pile of books gathering up on your nightstand? What about some kind of crafting hobby like woodworking or knitting? If not, now's the perfect time to round out your skills and start researching something new that you've been interested in. And if tip number 4 was my favorite, tip number 6 is probably going to be a lot of your favorites. Get that tattoo you've been wanting. For some reason, we martial artists love our tattoos. Normally they take us out of training with a long healing time, but right now you're going to be out of training anyway. Take that extra 100, 150, whatever that you're saving by not going to the gym this month, and use it to get that new tattoo or body piercing or whatever you've been thinking about. I recently took the opportunity to get my very first tattoo while waiting on my injury to heal. I've got this little guy with my wife for our anniversary. It's a great way to find a silver lining in a bad situation, and you'll get to show it off to everyone once you come back. So, those are my 6 tips to help you stay sane until you get back on your feet. How about you? What advice do you have for any other martial artists going through a rough recovery? Give your best tips in the comments below, and while you're there, why don't you go ahead and hit subscribe. Help the channel grow and get notified whenever there's a new video. Thanks for watching, and once I'm all healed up, I'll be back with more. Until next time.